They cleared like 20 acres. Assuming they didn't get a permit for that.
Big ones that can start now.
Yeah, it was during the fire. They did it as an emergency. They just went and cleared it because they had their property to burn.
We're not expanding, but.
Potatoes,
we're expanding.
tomatoes.
Tomatoes, tomatoes.
But I mean, like, if there was an emergency and we expanded out.
Good time.
What is that?
Good timing.
Elko's expansion, we're celebrating that next week, so that'll be good. It's huge, 15,000 square foot building and another.
Yeah,
5
the
acres
distance is
of
not
asphalt.
there. Yeah.
Who's that?
Getting glad.
Elko Forest building?
Monday,
Oh,
I kind of want to go
Monday,
on,
so-
yeah, I don't, I have a problem with distance,
Yeah.
but,
You're gonna. I
like,
think
so
building
on my
from
couch, I
that
can't read the
or-
Comcast
One building,
Um,
15,000 square foot. building.
guide, it's
And
blurry.
the rest is just for, as they're doing some great inventory, has shipped it out.
Oh,
Wow.
with my glasses on, I could read it. Well, my old, before I had.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, so I did some research today, it just not, this takes a while,
Yeah.
that dial.
Said John was seeing the halos for. I don't know,
Oh, like
2
the
months.
headlights.
Headlights, and then getting like.
The night is interesting, the lights and the night is interesting, and then like those guys that are Drew and Travis and all them sitting in front of that window the other day.
Yeah.
I could not, they were all like dark, but I could see outside, yeah,
Be careful.
but I could see outside, it was really weird, I could see like right by them. But they were like all dark. The lights, got some affected me, but we'll get it. We'll get it dialed in. He said he'll probably have to do LASIK on my left eye anyway, for stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Shelton Community Health Services.
Get a
Yeah.
laser pointer for $2.99 and stare at
Just
it.
says-
Oh, yeah. Welcome to study session December 12th. Donna, will you do a roll call, please?
I will. Councilmember Bode,
Here.
Councilmember Sherman is absent this evening, so Councilmember Gutierrez,
Here.
Marinesco,
Here.
Deputy Mayor Schmidt.
Here.
Councilmember McDowell
Present.
and Councilmember Peterson.
Here,
Thank you, Donna.
You're welcome.
Tonight, we have Community and Economic Development Director Jay Hill, along with his team, has information for us about International Property Maintenance Code.
Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council, thank you very much. I'm joined tonight by our building official, Sean Carlstrom, and our code enforcement officer, Will Gano. I don't know if you've met Will, he's fairly new to us, but he's been doing good work out there, but, and you've probably met Sean before, so.
Work on railroad.
Thanks. So tonight we're going to be talking about the International Property Maintenance Code. We have a presentation and afterwards going to go to free flow questions and answers. And then we'll shift into a discussion about the height limit. We were requested to bring a presentation about, should we, could we, and if we did raise the height limit, what does that look like? And then we'll have some other items after that. So I'm going to let Sean lead the presentation, and Will and I are here to jump in on specific things related to code enforcement or how it relates to zoning and some of the other practices that we have. So let Sean take it away.
All right. Are we gonna?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you just have to prompt Mary to move through the
Next slide.
Next slide.
Mark, do we want to announce early that we're gonna have a new item at the end?
Please.
Yeah, we're gonna have under D1, we're gonna have a discussion on appeal process.
Yeah.
So just let everybody
We
know.
have some conflicting language within this.
I just wanted to listen to
Should the first.
My arm.
Okay.
Proposed changes, I should say.
All right. Well, the property maintenance code. The introduction, what is? The provisions of this code shall apply to all existing residential and non-residential structures. Equipment and facilities for light, ventilation, space, heating, sanitation. Protection from the elements, a reasonable level of safety from fire and other hazards. And for a reasonable level of sanitary maintenance. Created the International Code Council. These codes were first adopted by reference by the Washington State Legislature in 1974 and in 1985, the legislature delegated the responsibility of adoption and amendment of these codes to the State Building Code Council. We did a little looking into finding out where else in Washington State, where jurisdictions have adopted the property maintenance code and put together this list of Bellingham, Monroe, Tumwater, Kent, and Black Diamond. Bellingham is noted up there as there was a source that rated them in the top 5 cities to live in the United States, not just Washington. And, they attribute that to their adoption of the property maintenance code and requiring that the community continue to be clean and free from hazards. So the 2021 International Building Code is the main code. Everything else kind of falls below that. And it's more or less the meat and potatoes. But the International Existing Building Code regulates the repair, alteration, change of occupancy, additions, and relocation of existing buildings, where if we adopt the property maintenance code, that would be extended to existing structures and premises. Premises being the property, equipment and facilities, light, ventilation, space heating, sanitation, life and fire safety hazards, responsibilities of the owners of the property, operators and occupants, and occupancy of existing premises and structures. So enforcement, the code enforcement officer will respond to the complaints and do the follow-up. Building official provides technical assistance, and the director issues the abatement order. So when we receive a complaint, that would typically go to Will, and he would then perform an investigation. And if there are any findings, then he would notice the property and provide them with an opportunity to cooperate and
Voluntary compliance.
Voluntary compliance, yes, sorry
Our
about
goal
that.
is always voluntary
Yeah.
compliance, whether it's potential adoption of the International Property Maintenance Code or our existing nuisance code, what we're dealing with now, right? We reach out to the property owner, much like we did at 1411, and said, hey, you have the opportunity to correct these violations. If you don't, then we'll proceed through the process.
And then if that doesn't work, the property maintenance code will help with we would write the written violation, description and statement of violation of why the notice is being issued. Of course, voluntary correction order allowing reasonable time to make the repairs. And then if that doesn't work, we would then go through the appeal process and statement of the right to file a lien on the property. And what about vacant building registration? The property maintenance code does not have a section or offer a means to address building registration, but we can do that through with our permitting process.
And that's something else to add to the discussion is some other communities, Aberdeen and a couple of others have set up a process where if you have a vacant building, it has to be on the register, it has to meet certain requirements, it has to be boarded up, there has to be a fence, there has to be regular maintenance and monitoring, there has to be a registered owner, has to have a contact number, has to be with the police department so they can notify them. There's a whole process basically to make sure that buildings don't just fall off the radar, become occupied, become even larger hazards, kind of like what we see in the properties. It requires a little bit more work on staff's part to kind of track and follow and maintain that, but we've been kind of doing something like that with, for example, 226 7th, that one that burned just a couple blocks from here. We've kind of been following up on that because it's in such a prominent location. We've got a contact number for somebody, and so we can call them and be like, you need to come get the graffiti off, you need to reboard up the windows, et cetera. And so IPMC doesn't include that specifically, but I know there's been discussion about should we consider something like that. We just wanted to bring up, this isn't the tool for that, but that tool is something that we could and should consider if council would practice to do so. Thanks.
Thank you.
What does it do and who does it apply to? It regulates the minimum requirements and standards for residential and non-residential structures. Again, light, space heating, protection from the elements, safe egress routes, potable water, ventilation, sanitation, fire hazards, accessibility. And the benefits to using it. The property maintenance code helps to establish minimum requirements to provide a reasonable level of health, safety, and property protection and general welfare of our community as they are affected by the continued occupancy and maintenance of structures and premises.
And just for an example of kind of like the more specific context of the code, like on space heating, for example, it says that you need to be able to keep the building at 68 degrees inside, a minimum of 68 degrees year round, presumably through the winter. Trying to like prescribe some detail. So if somebody were to call and be like, I live in this building, my landlord doesn't have any heat turned on, it's 45 degrees in here and my kids are freezing. Like there's a method for enforcement of these substandard housing conditions that unfortunately we're seeing a little bit more of, and we don't really have a way to address some of those specific conditions. There's some building code remedy, but it's more appropriate here.
Good question.
Yeah.
So several years ago, we talked about, it was quite a while ago, we talked, and I'm sure you remember this, Mark. We talked about inspecting people's residential houses. If we're suspect that the inside of the house is not safe. For instance, you have a whole bunch of air conditioners and windows and they're all, two of them are plugged into one outlet, that type of thing, which is dangerous. Is that kind of what you're looking at here? Going into people's residential homes and checking them or how-
It's not like proactive, like we're gonna start knocking on doors to go into everybody's house. It's more community driven, really.
So if I chose to live that way, they'd probably never come to my house, but if I rented my house to you and I made you live that way, you could call them.
okay. It's the rental owners, the owners.
Analogy, or if, let's take, since it's the topic of the day, 1411 Railroad. If that property starts sliding, if you will, right? If the roof is degraded, if the paint starts degrading, there's windows broken or something like that. That can be addressed before it comes to full abatement. Through the property maintenance code. We can address that property before it's a full tear down. It becomes more of a blight in the community, it becomes more expensive, right? For maybe abatement or the property owner at that point. And then it's hopefully put into use and put into housing much quicker than that property is going to be.
And was that rental, correct? Or were they squatting? Because we weren't able to get a hold of the owner, correct?
It's a long and sordid tale that
Okay.
the short version, it started as a rental.
Okay.
And then was after a while.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, essentially the property owner wasn't able to maintain structure or contact, ability to manage his property anymore, then it became more of a sliding situation.
So back at the beginning, I don't expect you to go clear back to this first slide, but you talk about residential. Having the heat and ventilation and all that. So these are houses that are already here because new house built, of course, have all that. So these are houses that are already here. is it a suspect, like it would have to be reported by someone that the ventilation's bad? All that,
It would be if it's on the inside of the well.
okay, all right,
Now, if there's blindingly apparent issues with the outside of the house, the biggest one around here is water intrusion. Then that leads to mold and other problems, the decay, or, the roof that is in disrepair. And then we see.
Yeah,
the
we
tarp.
see a blue tarp on Google Earth for the last 3 years at the Pine Garden Apartments, right?
Yeah.
Like, we can do something about that now. Whereas
Yes,
in the past, we'd have to wait for a resident to complain to us about it.
Mhm.
Right? Which
And
we
that
weren't
doesn't-
getting
And that
those.
doesn't necessarily fall within our nuisance code right now.
Correct.
A tarp on a roof doesn't necessarily fall within the.
But we know when people are living in that residence, that that's an unhealthy and unsafe situation, but especially when, again, it's been multiple years or whatever. It's not like it's reasonable.
And in front of Sean is the IPMC, just for your reference, it's not. It's
not phone book?
it's not a big hearing bind that you.
It's Shelton phone book.
Yeah, exactly. So, just for, I guess, context in the depth, I guess, if you know, of the code itself.
Now, gentlemen, correct me if I'm wrong, if PD goes in there and they see something and then they report it to us, because they were there for a legal reason, they were responding to something, and then they're like, yeah, this outlet has like 25 things in it, and it is a safety violation, it was witnessed by law enforcement officers lawfully doing their job, and that could get us into the house, correct, gentlemen? But we're not gonna go knocking on doors being like, hey, look at your outlets.
right. Yes,
Yeah.
the outlet team,
I mean,
Yeah, we're
can we maybe talk, I know it's a good time to do that, but can we maybe talk about the complaint-based approach? Because I think what I've heard, at least the feedback that I've gotten, is, typically when we have these issues, like, why is the city doing something about 1411 West Relevant? It's like, so file a complaint. Why do you need a complaint? It's obvious. Yeah, good point. It's obvious from the street, deal with it, like, right? Let's deal with it. Let's give you guys the teeth to clean up the community that have been asked to clean up for the last however many years.
Set the low end. All right, check.
The lowest in this case, yeah. Part of the problem too is that, our ability to enter property, like even just to enter the property itself, not even the structure is fairly limited, without the authority to do this. It gives us a little bit more statutory authority to actually investigate some of these situations, where, otherwise it's entirely voluntary. Like, we can say, hey, we're here from the city, we have a complaint that we need to follow. So it gives us, say a more coercive kind of thing, where that's kind of the necessary option. Sometimes, we don't get voluntary compliance, we're seeing that right now. So this gives us an option to a different avenue to pursue.
And Bill might be able to speak, excuse me, what is the most effective measure? Is it that personal contact? Is it going up and knocking on the door and saying, we have a code violation, or this issue, you might not be even aware that it's a code violation? Or is it a letter, or a citation sent out? You can probably provide more information. It's gonna be different with every property owner, right?
Of course.
Particularly if it's a rental or absentee property owner, rather than an occupied structure.
Right. If it's owner occupied structure, then I'm all about knocking on doors and educating people and being like, hey, I need to bring this to your attention. But with, like, if they're renting the property, then I'll go direct with the property owner. I'll be like, this is your property, it's your responsibility to upkeep this. And, here are your consequences if not. But all about voluntary compliance.
I'm glad you brought that up, and we had an issue on Washington Street where we had a property owner who, is fairly distant from maybe the tenant, and we had some, I'll be honest, we had some aversion to pressing on the property owner, right? Because we felt it's not the property owner's fault, right? They have a bad tenant in there that's causing the problem, and but it's their property, right?
It is their
They own it, right? They vet the tenant, they're responsible for the tenant, their behavior, and what happens there. I think they are the property owner. I understand that. It's unfortunate sometimes, right? It's it's not necessarily always their fault. So it's when we do go through this process, is do we provide the property owner with the right support when they do have landlord tenant issues, right? If you have the mechanisms to do it, I don't know. But I do remember that being, you know, kind of a contentious issue where, you know, let's educate more, let's continue to try to communicate more, let's, you know, versus walk through kind of your ask, tell, make process, right? Which I'm a fan of, to be honest with you. But
At the end of the day, the property owner is responsible for any lien that might be placed on the property. So I think it'd be in their best interest to address that, forthright and make sure that, you know, we're providing as much information as possible if it gets to the point of citation. Yeah.
Well, and hopefully that's to their benefit as well, because hopefully if they aren't here, they aren't seeing it, they may have no idea that their property is being treated in that condition either. So, I mean,
Or they're trying to evict somebody and the courts are just ridiculous, in this state evicting anybody. Sometimes it's a year or two. You don't have to evict somebody. I mean, I've got somebody who didn't pay me rent for 3 years. You know?
That's
So,
you're still responsible.
Yeah. you know, so I mean, sometimes it's not easy to get somebody out and clean your place up, you know.
I think the next slide talks a little about what we've already been talking about.
Yeah.
Not intending to punish the residents, but.
So what does it not do? The adoption of the property maintenance code is not intended to punish residents. In fact, the goal of the city is to achieve voluntary compliance. However, if voluntary compliance is not achieved, the property maintenance code can be a valuable tool that will effectively help the residents and the property owners to not become so far out of compliance that compliance becomes burdensome and feel impossible for residents to achieve. And addresses minor maintenance issues before they become slated for abatement due to cost prohibitive, irreversible structural issues.
Issue, Councilor, is an example of that.
Well, it's like, I don't know, sorry, it's kind of more informal, free thinking discussion, right? But every time a building has to get raised.
Yeah.
I ask, how did that happen? Why did that have to happen? Right?
Yeah.
You know, every time we have to bulldoze something, how did we let it get that bad? What could we have done to help the property owner? What could we have done to enforce on issues? I don't know, right? Like, because the cost of construction, new construction. Versus rehabilitation of the existing, right? Like, right? And so we're trying to kind of help people in a way.
Yeah.
We're trying to kind of make this right. It's not an overreach, in my opinion. It's not an overextension of government. It's not over regulation. It's. My family, your family, we deserve to live in a safe and healthy place, just like, you know, we want to deal with crime and other issues. It's like, this is part of it, you know. When rats and other issues are crawling around the community, we talked about that as probably the biggest conversation we've ever had. Rats and cats, right?
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Chicken cat.
Thank you for relying on it. Yeah.
And to add on to that, so like in downtown, for example, we have a mixed use building that we went up to the top and we could see there's grass growing in this flat roof where the water had been pooling and collecting, and then the water had found its way into the building and completely rotted out a bunch of the timbers and made it a safe situation for the 35 people living inside. So it's in our interest to catch that stuff early and fix that early before we have to condemn a building with 35 families in it, you know.
You have an impeded alleyway right now
Mhm.
because of dereliction of the maintenance of.
It wasn't maybe specific buildings, but yes.
Yeah, I can name a specific land, you know, it's,
Mhm.
you know, we have, and that's access to the rest of the public that's cut off and. Yeah, whatever, emergency services, et cetera, et cetera. So,
So we felt, I think you-
I kind of forgot what I was gonna ask. Oh, well, maybe this is kind of what I was thinking. Probably 6, 7 years ago. We had I think Steve Goin was here and he presented some different structures around town that was like just,
we
you
have
know.
our top 10 abatement list, right? Is that what you're
Yes,
referring to?
yes. How many of those have we dealt with?
We have to go back and look. I think a majority of them were either dealt with by a city or through the existing property or a new property owner. Yeah.
Building next to Domino's is gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's-
Well done.
Yes.
That had to be.
Yeah.
That thing is.
There are several on that list that, yeah, and we developed staff, we developed that list, put it out publicly, frankly. And there, I don't know, there might have been a little bit of social shaming, but there was also some abatement done by the city, and we have made that a priority in the 2024 budget. We have budgeted $80,000 for abatement in 2024, so this is a priority for, that this council has set for us.
Yeah. But I would also say in a perfect world, which we don't live in, but in a perfect world, the city wouldn't have to have an abatement fund because it wouldn't get to that point. I think that's the whole goal of this, right? It's like, how do we catch things early and do it in a way that is making people safe and making sure that people can take care of their property. One of the things that does come to mind though, is I can think of a couple of specific residential structures that have gone downhill significantly due to the age and physical capacity of the residents. So one of the questions that I would ask is there a way that we could partner with some of the agencies that we know have programs, whether it's, you know, I know Habitat has some programs and some other folks, so that there's an avenue to help people who don't either have the technical interest or the physical ability to make those improvements. And I'm sure there's financial implications as well. But the longer it goes on, the harder it's going to be to come back from that. So how can we rally as a community to provide them with a way to navigate through some of those resources?
I was gonna say, I attended a roundtable today, and there were some home repair options from the Department of Housing Urban Development, U.S. Department of Agriculture, Federal Emergency Management Agency, and Small Business Administration that offer some home repairs and
Right.
business repairs,
Yeah.
federally.
Sure.
See, I think it's important for us to have some of those resources,
Yeah.
because the sad complaints are gonna be that exact one.
Right.
We're going in there to somebody's roof that's tarped and it's been tarped for 2 years, but it's an 85-year-old person on social security who owns the home, is barely keeping up on their taxes, and how do we not make them do it? Because we're allowed to, but how do we make them do it?
How do we help them to get there,
Yes.
right?
They want them to remain in their house, right?
Correct.
The intent is that
Ideally.
people have, yes.
So that's the ideal, like, worst situation that we could run
Yes.
into, and it's different when it's just a slumlord.
Right. So I just wanted to make sure that as we're navigating this process, we're thinking about, of course, like the resources you're talking about, Mayor Nisco, but also there's state and county and even local folks that have stepped up and created ways to help their neighbors. And so if there's a way that we can, I guess, sir, I don't think that it is the city's function to monitor that process, but I think if there's a way that we can create some sort of a resource, and that would be something that would help in those cases.
I know we've done it with junk vehicles and early vehicles because there's some value in those.
Right.
As bulk, you know, like steel. So obviously we provided a resource. If somebody has a vehicle on their site, they're not able to take care of it. There's people out there that'll come, you know.
You know, I think back to United Way doing cleanup on
Yes.
Cookson. I think
Exactly.
back to when, I mean, that's many moons ago, but like the high school students used to literally build a house. Like we have people within our community that have skills and there's an element of community service in it. And so while I don't want those programs to be abused, and I don't think it's the city's responsibility to, you know, manage that process, I do think it's important that we're partners in creating a system that helps our vulnerable population to address these things, because that's not the goal of this. Like, that's exactly what we're talking about. We're not trying to punish people. We're trying to help people get to where they need to be and be safe.
And I like the idea of putting together like a resource page and kind of directing people to what they can find. We've offered dump vouchers in the past from either United Way or from Mason County Public Health. We've had a community cleanup event, like we're trying to be more proactive in helping people. I like the idea of collecting that. Place to share that, so.
Yeah, we, you know, for the first couple of few years, since 18, we had the freedom days. And I'll be honest, you know, I expected to see lines down the street, you know, with dump trailers, pickup trucks full of stuff, right? To get rid of, it's free, right? Get rid of it. And, you know, turnout was low, right? And so we gave that a shot for a few years. Now we kind of need to stick, right? Like, get there, we'll provide you the free dump, right? But you gotta clean up, right?
Our community cleanup events in May, we had two weekends that we did that. We took 5 dump truck loads, about 10 tons worth of garbage. Just for reference, we already took 5 dump truck loads off of the 1411 property.
Exactly.
And have many more to go.
Wow.
7,
Oh.
we're up to 7, sorry.
7
Wow.
10-yard dump trucks,
Yes.
sweet.
And there's still more to go. So I mean, it's just, so when we have these cleanup events, we should be really hoping for larger volumes than we But we'll try again next year.
And it's in a way, I remember we talked about this, it's kind of like, can you, instead of just saying, hey, it's just community-wide cleanup event, kind of like go knock and talk and hand them a voucher. You can throw it out for free on May 1st,
We
right?
did that.
Expect to see your license plate number drive through, or whatever.
We had very strongly suggested that knock into, we did that this year.
You did, okay,
We
cool.
give people little postcards like, hey, just by the way, you should.
How did that go? How did that go over?
A few of the people received it and actually came down and brought their trash.
Oh, great.
I mean, I will say 4 or 5, not very many, but
You got
got a few. I mean, better than none.
And I'm fully planning on this year with the problem. The properties that I'm dealing with and everything. Encouraging them, hey, this is free, the city's gonna help you out. So we don't get further into the whole everything. But like I said before, I like to talk to people and just convey what we have to offer instead of just sending mailers or whatever. I'm just gonna talk to them.
The most effective practices in my experience here, 30 years in the city shop haven't been just well described. It's the diligence of city staff to knock on the door, come back a week later and say, hey, I thought we talked about getting rid of this stuff. How much time do you need? You put it back on them a little bit, but it's being diligent and it takes time. You have to go out to sometimes these properties multiple times. But when they know that you're not gonna walk away, right, and turn your back on it and not return, that's when it doesn't get addressed. It's when we're kind of bulldogging these for lack of a better term, we get compliance. We get action.
Yeah, and I'll say, that resonates because I met a gentleman at Economic Development Expo 2-3 years ago. And he's a videographer, he does a lot of film for cities and counties and stuff to try to market them. And he actually, one of the films in Korea, I highly encourage people to watch it. It's called Small Town Spirit. It's about Menneson, Pennsylvania. Steel area, depressed economy, everything rusted out for many years. Code enforcement was what dug that city out of. They had declining population issues, right? Not just revenue problems. They had people moving away, literally in droves, right? And the film highlights the investment the city made in hiring code enforcement and bolstering things like property maintenance codes. And what it ultimately kind of did, with the vibe I got from the video, was it highlighted what the city could be. When you were going through this and explaining to people when they were doing the knock and talks and saying, hey, you should clean this up because like this could be great. This could be this, or this could generate this buzz or this attraction. Some people have just been, so burned out with the depressed economy and depressed era. That just that little glimmer of hope in that discussion at the doorstep or whatever was enough to get people to start investing and turning things around. I don't know where they're at today. For all I know. But the story was very positive, and it kind of explained exactly what you guys are going through with voluntary compliance and educating people in the community. But then creating kind of that mechanism where if they can't get it, the education isn't working, then we have something we can do, right? Yeah, I think it's great.
Yeah, these are just a couple possible scenarios. I think we could all drive around town and find issues like these.
Is that B Street?
No, both of these were just pulled off the web, but
There's a junkyard on B Street. I mean, I'm surprised we can't do that right now, today. Walk up there and say this stuff needs to go, but we've got to have code without adopting somebody else's code that addresses issues like that. I mean, I'm all for cleaning up places like B Street and stuff like that. I'm not sure I'm excited about adopting a code written by somebody else that I want to read first, by the way. I'd like to read the whole book and see what's in there. But I mean, if we have certain issues we want to address, why don't we write our own code for these certain issues? I just want to make sure we're not making people mow lawns that are 3 inches long and, and the roof issue that James brought up. How do we take care of a 80-year-old couple that can't afford a $32,000 roof? And that is a reality today. of a roof, 20 to 30,000 bucks. What do we do?
Okay, so a little bit, we have a nuisance code, right, so it addresses tall grass, it addresses junk vehicles, you know, what else? Trash in the yard, things like that.
Standing water.
Yeah, it's not real robust.
And it doesn't include any standard, right? It's
Yeah.
just you know, unkept vegetation to, you know, it doesn't really go into detail.
If it's a nuisance to me, it's a nuisance, no matter what it is.
We have to define that within our code so we can consistently.
is the new
apply.
word.
I know, I love that.
Yeah.
The good thing about having the IPMC already written, it's much easier to adopt, less work for us and for attorney to
Yeah.
develop those covenants. I fully understand. And maybe there's portions of it that can just be gleaned and, you know, and adopted as amendments to the code, but you know, those are the decisions that why we're here tonight, to get further information from council.
And also there's the opportunity to do local amendments, so if we want to change you know, tweaks and dials and some things, you know, what we consider our local standard, if we want to adopt a section or not a particular section, we can do that.
Yeah. And I'm all for looking at scenarios where we have multi-family units and they're not safe. I mean, we should already be dealing with that, or somebody should be, whether it be the health department or the fire department, or somebody should not, you know,
Part of the problem was not having this. Is that this is ours now.
Yeah.
So it should, right? Yeah.
should be a code out there already that deals with that, though. Gotta be.
Well, I think we talked about the existing building code and you know, deals with the structures themselves, right? The framing piece, you know, the insulation as far as the energy code. This takes it a little bit further. It talks about how the building can start degrading over time.
From code enforcement side, this actually dials in and gives me like the elements of proof, instead of just being like unkept vegetation. You may not think it's unkept vegetation, Captain. Councilmember McDowell might think that it is. This will be able to dial it in and say, hey, this is what the understanding is, so I have a go by. So I know how to enforce it.
Less certainty for staff.
And you said something actually important, and I think we should talk a little bit about it, but at some point it will come to muni court. Right, and then, you know, you've got to present your side, they've got to present their side, and the judge's got to make a determination. They need something, right?
Well, I think that's a theme of what we've been talking about since 2018. Clarity in the process, predictability in the process, and being clear about the expectations on both sides for staff and for our community. And so I agree with Mayor Nisco. I think we need to take a deep dive and make sure that everything in there or the pieces that we want to adopt make sense for us. But I think the concept of taking this into the next step of setting the community standard and being clear about what we qualify as the standard of living for our community is something that's really critical, and having that done in a measurable way. Data girl here. I appreciate the fact that there's some really specific instances, so it's not that gut feeling of that's not,
Yes.
you know, I don't think that's gonna pass muster, but you know, my husband and I maybe have different ideas about what that looks like day to day. I'm sure those conversations happen all throughout the community. So, you know, I see there could be a kickback of, I didn't move into an HOA for a reason. I don't want people to tell me what color to paint my house. That's not what this is. And I think it's really.
Oh, we don't know
important.
that. We haven't read it yet.
Well, painting, yes,
It's
color,
not-
no.
It's not design
It's
standard.
not design standard,
So yeah, sure, maybe your house needs to be painted for this code. It
right?
can be painted in a rainbow, right? It's not telling you what color, you know, it's free of, you know, it's free of raw wood that, you know, amateurs. And to be completely transparent, we addressed this with the Development Code Steering Committee 21.
Yep.
I think. And some of the same discussions, right? How far is this going to go? Is this gonna go too far? Where it is? You know, my grass is 6 inches tall or something, you know, maybe there's a paint fleck on the backside in the backyard and,
Right,
you know, you're going around looking over the fence for that. We don't have the time, we don't have the energy, we don't have the will for that, correct? I think that's not the intent here.
Yep. but I,
Can we fully demonstrate that? probably not to everybody in the community. There's always gonna be doubters, there's always gonna be people thinking that this is gonna be taken too far. But truly, if you look at our code enforcement practices over the last, let's just call it 5 years or 10 years, we're not gonna have them to proactively address it to that degree.
How many homes have been lost due to a structure fire because of something related to the property issues, right? And there's a rooftop that's lost, a family that's displaced. I mean, I was a volunteer firefighter for like 5 years, right? And I can tell you that really nice houses don't, right? Like, right, so the unkept, unmaintained, the multiple outlets people are plugging things into or whatever the issues are. Yeah, I mean, a lot of times you were stepping through piles of garbage. It was unfortunate, and again, you have a displaced family, you have a rooftop that now has lost revenue, because they're gonna rebuild the house back there, I don't know, I mean, over by the hospital, there's been a burnt down home for 2 years, 3 years,
Three?
maybe more than that. Time flies, right, but we're sitting there and it's on the corner, right, it's just sitting there, vacant, empty. We have a housing crisis right now, people need a place to live, and I'm assuming there's probably people living in there.
And
Right now.
we have neighbors that would like us to address these
Yeah.
situations. I think we've received a call about that, sure.
Yeah, sure, thank you.
Within the last couple months, asking for the city's help in addressing that specific issue.
Yeah, and I gotta believe we assume a bunch of liability, especially if we go in the red tag,
Mhm.
and then we don't go back and make sure it's secure, and so I'm like, construction fencing around the property and secure the property.
Is that an insurance issue sometimes too, in the houses that have burnt? The insurance companies just take, because the house over here, Wittenberg was living in, the White House,
Behind the journal.
yeah, behind the journal, and then this one over here on 7th. Yeah,
But if you want an insurance company to help, if you want an insurance company to move, a citation from the homeowner might be helpful, right? I mean, I'm not saying you have to hammer on people if they're hard times, but if they, insurance companies aren't gonna pony up or they're gonna drag their feet,
Well, big thing with a couple of those too, because I know of two specific in town recently, it's that the insurance company will pay out, but everybody wants to rebuild. But then they realize what it actually takes to do that, gosh, I don't have the means and the time. So sometimes those do sit for quite a while because their intent is they want to do something with it, but the reality is something different.
And in my mind, that's what the benefit is in this, is that hopefully we're catching things before it gets to that state, right? So we're avoiding getting in that, now I'm doing a full rebuild, now I'm bringing things up to the new code, because we have historic, beautiful places here, but I mean, this place has been, built out over last 100 and it didn't happen overnight, and so we're having different issues in different parts of town, and so I think recognizing that the alternative is that house gets to a place where now the rebuild is not financially a possibility for a developer. And then we have more city lots that are not generating revenue, not providing housing, not having a purpose, and that's not what any of us want to see.
Well, in that scenario, I wouldn't mind seeing something, that an insurance company has to, regardless, has to remove a burnt structure, a total structure.
I think we're getting into a world different.
No, I don't.
Tell you what an insurance company has to do.
No, I don't think so, because if a person can take the money and run away and just leave it, then what do you do? Then we got an abatement process, it's gonna cost us $80,000.
that's not the insurance
Yeah.
responsibility. They can't help it if
We
the
can look
person.
further if there's any model out there,
Yeah.
or if there's
But that's what's happening.
state or federal laws that prohibit us from, depending on, I know, East Street, I don't know the address specifically, but that was bank ownership.
Yeah.
It's still under bank ownership. They've actually contacted the city asking for us to release the lien that is $27,000,
Yeah,
$28,000.
$23,000.
Yeah, and so they contact the city, they want to sell the lot. It's a nice little lot, flat up on Mountain View, want us to release the lien so they can sell the property. All the while, the bank did not address the code enforcement issues on that property when there was a tenant living there.
They could have,
Absolutely right, so they're gonna claim, some of these companies are gonna claim, maybe, whatever it might be, lack of information or, unknowingly, that the property was falling into disrepair. At the end of the day, we had an expense on that property. They certainly have more means than we do as banks and insurance companies, so. We have our constituency to take, take.
You gotta get an A for effort on that.
Yeah, absolutely, right. But it's vacant, the bank still owns it, that's the interesting part. They have a liability sitting there, there's a buildable lot in the city of Shelton. and
Theoretically,
they're will-
probably 2 houses on it.
They're willing to sit on it.
I think I've said this before in the past. We do things as a council for good reasons, but we're not gonna be here forever.
Mhm.
We're gonna be gone and somebody down the road is going to read something that we adopted and, and overreach. That's why I want to make sure that, before we adopt another book, it's not a very big book, but another
Start
book
book,
that
yeah.
we know what's in that book and we're comfortable with it, that somebody will interpret it down the road the way that we want it interpreted, or they can change it themselves, because,
Yeah,
I mean.
That we agree with you. In that matter, we certainly don't wanna be the, we don't wanna be the heavy-handed, city staff that are just coming out to a property and saying, here's your problem, here's your citation, see you later, have a nice day.
Sure, but I think to Mayor Nisco's point, you were not who we're worried about, right? We, like that whole, this is make good neighbors, the whole point is like, we have to, I hope not, but we have to interpret for like. Out
Yeah.
the nth degree, what does that look like, and are we comfortable with that or are we not? So, yeah, absolutely, I think it's something we look at, but I think the concept, I think the direction absolutely makes sense. And again, as long as we're having that more holistic approach, I'm comfortable with moving forward.
And that is what we're here for tonight, is to get direction from council, if there's at least enough interest for us to prepare, what an ordinance would look like, what those, get it before you, and then we can have those.
Are we able to get
scholars
this information scanned to us? Because I would definitely like to read it.
I'm still concerned about how the process all starts. Like, right now, it's just complaint based, right? And a lot of the complainants have different ideas of what beauty is, right? So like, I might have a really beautiful bushy plant that flowers, but it looks ugly in the winter, So, what I'm talking about? And then I have some PTSD because a lot of my neighbors use code enforcement to hammer each other and make someone come out to look at their stuff so they can get them for stuff. You know what I'm talking about? So, and it becomes a back and forth, and it's like an old beef from like when they're in high school, so I'm like. And then we're gonna add on and say, hey, that's not code, we're the city, and we decide what's beautiful. So that's my big brother, like, fear that I'm sure a lot of us have. So that's my concern, and like, how do we start the process? Oh, is it just complainants? Is it the city? Is it both? Is it gonna be laser focused on well, it's 3.75 inches, not 3 inches, so those are the things that I think everyone has a fear
I
about.
think we'll be able to provide you the actual copy, and you'll be able to see the examples and how it's written and get a better understanding of the true intent. You're seeing kind of a 30,000 foot presentation here, but.
Right. I'm just concerned about how it's gonna get used, but if we promote people to start calling up and making more complaints, people are gonna be empowered to like, that person's shining a light in their, so, I mean.
Yeah, it doesn't start with it starts with the city's gonna have to decide if it starts with whether it's safe or if it's pretty.
That's why having clarity though makes it to where we make it feel less weaponized, because we do have that clarity that it is 6 inches. So you are at 9 inches, so you are over, you are at 6.5, you are over. We have a standard that's held across the line.
I don't want to see him out measuring grass with a
Look,
tape.
we're giving ridiculous examples to it, but I mean, just like, but we have to have that.
Yeah.
Because once again, it can't just be, I feel your yard is too long. It has to be, we have a standard of what a long
And it's
height
equally
is,
applied.
and then we
Right.
equally, exactly, we equally
Right.
apply it. So then, because anything like this with enforcement gets weaponized, it does.
And we're also moving towards more natural lawns and not.
Yeah.
Not,
But if we have a
green
standard,
grass,
all
so.
we have to do is, you're not within the standard, it's clear, and then we provide that standard.
And with limited staff, we will prioritize how these issues come about, right? So if we get a complaint or we get a My Civic, whatever, ticket filed and it's 6 inches of tall grass. Or if the burned out house on the corner isn't boarded up, where are we gonna spend our time, right? We're gonna go to that first, and then priority is gonna go down until we have time. My guess is we won't have a lot of time to go out and measure grass.
Exactly, yeah.
So should it be in there?
Examples, why?
That's up to.
I might say it's in the weeds.
But you don't have to measure it when it's this tall. Literally, my neighbors, their lawn gets this tall. I don't have to measure, I just have to call Will and I'll say, hey, Will, that's grass
It's a
is
rare
tall,
day to
it's
plant.
dead of summer, it's
Yeah.
dry. And if a match gets thrown in there, it's gonna be bad news for the neighbors.
What, and Mark, you mentioned that the steering code development committee had
Yeah.
had some conversation on this, so if there's any feedback from that group or master builders or development community that is pertinent to this conversation, it'd be nice to have that on the earlier side than the
Absolutely.
after the fact.
Yeah, I'll check my notes again. It revolved around. It's the same conversation we're having here tonight, right? It was the exact same conversation. It might have been about a window rather than grass, but it was the same tenor of the conversations.
Hey, developers build plan unit developments, subdivisions all the time, and they covenant homeowners associations, and they have architectural standards and everything else, so it happens. It happened in 1996 when they built my neighborhood off of Rockdale Road. They had a set of standards that they wanted the neighborhood to look and feel like, and that was back in 1996 in Shelton. So this is not a foreign concept. This is not something, atypical of other cities. I mean, I know you threw up a few that have adopted a code. But this type of thing, creating a community where people want to live, it's attractive, has been around for a long time. So we're just trying to put some teeth in it so we can get there.
This answers all of our questions. We wasted all that time. Get it shown.
So how does the IPMC improve our current methods? The IPMC provides us with the ability to administer the codes effectively and equally among the residents of our community, which also in turn helps to bridge the gap to serious structural issues and livability. What outcomes will we see? The adoption will effectively eradicate the spread of rodents, roaches, mosquitoes, and the diseases that they bring. And we'll also see maintained safe neighborhoods, putting value into the community and increasing the home values. And restores pride in ownership and the community.
Who's ready to sign?
The broken windows syndrome. So if you avoid the broken window syndrome or it's scratching your vehicle, you get your first scratch, guess what? The second one's not a big deal, then your 10th one is like, whatever. I'm not gonna fix it. So the broken window syndrome is just that. Let's address the first broken window, and then the second, the third, and the fourth are
Yep.
less likely to be just kind of accepted.
Similarly, we address this during graffiti. Graffiti is an indication of this town and blight, right? If it's not dealt with, leave alone. And he said, we don't want to see it, right? And we have expectations that it gets eradicated as soon as possible. We're holding ourselves to the same standard as well. as the
Well,
city, right?
we still got a lot of graffiti on our property and on private property that's been there for years. The car wash has got graffiti on the side. It's been there for 5 years. They lightened it up a little bit, but it's still there.
Yeah.
And there's,
There's a rule on that.
yeah, we have a rule on that. We passed it.
On private.
Yeah, we passed it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we did. And speaking of, hey, we're on graffiti really quick. We should remove all those barriers and the fences along Olympic Highway, Alder and on North Cliffs that just keep getting graffitied over and over and over again. I looked at them, they don't do anything. I looked at where they sit and I don't see them hitting anybody's house.
Well, it's not just headlights, but it's also sound. It was one of the
Yeah, the residents-
conversations with the residents as part of the development of that plan, so I I'm more of the mind of solve the problem, don't just take it away, because it's just gonna pop up
I would-
someplace else.
I would be happy to incentivize a program where city staff, public works staff, or somebody comes up with a better mousetrap about how to clean those slats, build a rig.
Yeah.
Come up with a method, I mean, right?
Yeah.
Come up with some sort of tool and build it on the truck that you can slide the slat through, the pressure washes off, the whatever, I mean.
They cover up and they're back in 2 days.
Okay.
On both those hills. Actually, the last one in Alder Norfolk Highway, they did all the way down it's like they were just walking down with the spray paint all the way down.
Yep.
Recently.
It continued up in front of Walmart,
Ouch.
the same pattern.
Well, they're gonna do their graffiti, somebody cleans it up and then they go, they're not cleaning up my graffiti, and they do it again.
But I think it's also the point that was made earlier in this meeting is that may happen the first 2, 5, 10, even 100 times, but eventually, right, like goodwill out, like we're gonna do what is the right thing to do and
Yeah, right.
have an expectation,
course.
so, yeah. All we can do is keep moving along and just deal with it day by day.
And graffiti is something you have to abate right away so people don't counteract, or
Mhm.
counter message. So, and mark territory as well, so.
And there are protective coatings out there now that you can paint on surface. It's clear.
Mhm.
But graffiti, nothing will stick to it. So then it's just a matter of washing it off.
We'll find out more information from Public Works Department about those road projects that specifically identify the slats and those fences, see what kind of commitments were made to those property owners that are adjacent and be able to provide more clarity there.
Yeah, the first half of North Cliff, there's actually no houses, and then there's that 3 houses where there's some, but.
You say North Cliff or Olympic Highway?
He said both.
No, it's split down.
Yeah, okay. Olympic Highway, I know that was in
Mhm.
public meetings, the headlights issue going up the road, that was vocalized from the community. Not necessarily us, and I don't know. But
So when you put that sealer on and somebody takes a can of spray paint and starts, does it just does it roll off or?
Yeah, there's different products out there, but yeah, it will not adhere. You might see a mess, but it'll just, rain will even
I
take
mean,
it.
that'd be nice to know. I've used a lot of kilts in the back of the Hillcrest
Yeah,
shell.
okay.
I mean, like 10 times in
Yeah.
5 years.
Yeah, we actually. Bid out, sort of got quotes and developed specs for this building. One of the options for us to seal the brick and have a giant graffiti the brick structure.
You know, they made that.
We didn't fund that, but
Didn't find the money in the couch cushions.
So there's a sealer on the brick in this building?
there is,
Yeah.
No, there is not, okay.
yeah, we didn't fund that portion of the project. We funded the, you know, 5 on the kind of cornice and the siding on the back of those repairs, it was about double to seal all the brick. I think.
But of course, 20 years ago, we weren't having trouble with graffiti, so you probably didn't think that that would ever happen to the building.
Yeah, you know, as long as I've been involved in parks, we've had graffiti from time to time. You know, over those years, certainly, I think it's a little more pervasive than maybe it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But we've, it's, you know, I think it's, maybe a little more bold. Specific to public areas and needs to be considered back in the dark, you know, areas behind the bathroom in the park or inside the bathroom itself, maybe they're a little more bold and then take advantage of some more public spaces. So I think this is the last slide.
Yeah,
Wrap up this project.
so the process is we draft the ordinance tonight. And amend the SMC Title 18. And the local amendments required, like with IVC and IFC, once the city council has voted and approved. And code adoptions or revisions to the SMC, the Community Development Department will appropriately amend any local adopted code to reflect those approved changes.
We won't draft it tonight, right?
No.
Okay, good. I think you said me.
I couldn't.
That was the royal we.
Caught that.
And when you start looking through IPMC, you'll see that there's bolded text in brackets that says insert jurisdiction requirement here. So like the grass, for example, it doesn't prescribe the grass. I just looked it up again to make sure that before I said this again, but it doesn't prescribe, it says literally insert jurisdiction requirements, so. We'll come to you with a recommendation. What the vegetation needs to look like, we'll put in the work on what the local amendments need to look like.
That'll get some public comment.
No, no. I mean, I would rather have another study session with that book in front of all of us and we go through it. Is where I would like to be. On one.
Do you wanna see, are you?
Say yes to. I'm just kidding. Get on the cat,
You-
we're not gonna be here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We'll be on the other side of the-
Maybe six is open.
Make this really good,
It'll
right?
be No, Jane, we'll be on the other side of the podium.
So
Why did you
is
do
that
that?
with the draft ordinance or without? You wanna start with the draft ordinance to see what it looks like?
As long as it's a study session and we're
Yeah.
able to go through that and then see
Absolutely.
what you're recommending and what the book. It's what's in the book as well, yeah.
Absolutely. And we'll certainly get you a copy of that. I think we can do electronically, right?
I have on PDF,
Yeah,
because I studied through it.
sure, yeah, so we can get you an electronic version in your free time.
I just want to make sure that what our intentions are the same intentions that are gonna happen 20 years down the road.
Yeah.
You know, that we're not creating something that's. I'll give you an example. I lived in an HOA once where I got fined because my shed was brown and my house was blue. That wasn't that in the ordinance when I bought the house, but that happened throughout the years, you know, that things. So people get different, boards change. You know, so, I mean, I actually got a fine for having moss on my roof as well once, you know, and it wasn't very much moss.
City shed starts voluntary compliance, not.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, Eric's point's well taken, right? Yeah, no, we don't, that's not our goal, right? But the reality of it is, you know, the average building in Shelton, whether it's residential or commercial, is 30 to 40 years old, right? And you can look at it, there's all this data on the assessor's website, housing characteristics. You can see the quality and condition, and there's 2 and 3, right? Quality is a fair point, condition, or excuse me, condition is fair, quality is good, right? Not great, not poor, but we're right in the middle, right? And so, yeah, if you renovate homes, right, like this town is ripe for that, right? And pushing people to that point, I think, you know, during the pandemic, lots of people were working on their homes, lots of people were spending money on that. That was great, right? And we want to kind of keep incentivizing in a way, continue to maintain the property, continue to improve it. It's good for the community, it's good for everybody, it's good for you too.
All right, so let's try to get some consensus for staff. Peter, where would you like to go with this?
Absolutely move forward at this point.
Moving forward, how?
Well, I think as was described, we'll have the ordinance, we'll have another study session.
Okay.
Take it from there.
Kathy,
Well, I won't be here, but move forward.
same with the study session?
Yeah.
That's fine.
Okay,
Study session.
I generally agree with that as well.
okay,
Good.
all right.
It's beneficial for us,
Okay.
right? It's not a burden on staff. I think it's beneficial to have this open conversation and that, absolutely.
I think it's good democracy. People get to see how sausage is made, and it's not as ugly as people think, but it's weird.
I'm excited for you to check it. I think you'll like a lot of what's in there, the layout of it. I like you taking your time too, because. Yeah, I only like to mow my lawn twice a year. So.
You do it right.
This hired guy to come cut the trees down, he'll ruin your backyard, and you won't have his lawn.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Well, Mr. Mayor, we're halfway through time and we still have 2 more items, so
Really nice.
jump us in here.
All right. Oh, yes, we have another. I was gonna say, go ahead. We have another item. Different some high limits. Get me all excited here, you know?
Height limits.
Okay, so we were requested to bring study session item to talk about possibly increasing height limits through town and what that would look like, what's the rationale. So we'll just kind of go over some terminology and then kind of where things exist spatially and then look for some policy direction. Keeping in mind that we can make changes now in advance of our comprehensive plan, or we can roll this into things that we consider for the comprehensive plan that need to be adopted after. So if there's like an urgency to do it before the comprehensive plan, we can consider that, or we can you know, wait until we're making the amendments that need to happen to our zoning code. They come out of our comprehensive plan update. So that's a 1.5 years from now that we would start that process. So it depends on the urgency with which you guys think that we need to address this issue, but we'll go ahead and start from here. So just kind of how we measure height. It's, you know, as we define it, the vertical distance from the average grade of the building site to the highest point of the roof for flat roofs, or it's the average of like a ridged, gabled, gambreled, whatever. So I kind of drew where the red line is there. I mean, if it's peaked roof, you know, it would be to about half of that point. So that's how we measure height, which is important because as buildings have taller, we were joking around about it the other day, like A-frames are entirely a pitched roof. And so the height on an A-frame would technically be more than the height on a flat roof building of comparable size. So you know, what this does allow for is like turrets and different kinds of articulation in the roof line, and causes flat roofs to basically be a little bit shorter, whereas the peaked roofs kind of they give us the opportunity to tuck attics in or have you know, architectural consideration or something. But anyway, so that's how we define height. Next slide. So stories. A story is going to the very quick version of this without getting into, you know, if we're on sloping, you know, properties with, you know, daylight basements and whatnot. Generally, if it's entirely below grade, it's not a story. If it's up in the attic kind of level, it might be a story. It depends on the roof and the structure and habitable space and things like that. The key being the space between such floor and the ceiling next above it. So if there's not a floor, if it's like a rafter kind of attic, there's not a defined floor, like a lot of people's attics, like our attic. You know, it's not a floor or a story, but if we were to put decking over our attic and in spaces where we've got 8 feet of head height up in our attic, we have a pretty steeply pitched roof, it could be an additional story. Do we even need to have a story definition? It's a policy question that we'll talk a little bit more about later. What does that get us versus just having high other kinds of design regulations? So next slide, please. So current height limits vary by zone. Typically, it's about 35 feet and 2 stories throughout most of the town. Within the public service zone and the airport zones, it's a little bit higher at 45 feet, 60 feet. But generally speaking, it's 35 and 2. In the downtown, it's 35 and 3. So it's the same height limit, but you're supposed to get an extra story in there. Anyway, next slide, please.
So public service must be this building. And the county
There's an
courthouse.
overlay, public service overlay through the downtown, that's the kind of county campus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
There's not much of it, correct?
no,
So just to show the zoning map again, just kind of see, most of the town is neighborhood residential. That's our catch-all residential zone that includes everything from apartment complexes to single family zoning to duplexes, to ADUs, all that kind of stuff. The downtown area is mostly the CRV and downtown zones, and so they have different regulations. But as you can see in the previous slide, it's generally about the same thing that's throughout. Next slide, please. This table is a little much, but just basically to summarize, a direction that we were thinking of heading with this is, you know, if we're going to change the height limit, if we're going to increase it, what do we increase it to? And a thing to think about is going by construction type. So within the International Building Code, associated codes, we define what the types of constructions are. Everything from type 5 Roman will be construction, which is just wood frame standard houses, all the way to types 1 and 2, which are, you know, like your steel frame glass buildings, completely non-combustible construction, concrete, things like that. So within those, it's hard to see on this slide, but generally, each of those types of construction has a height limit that's associated with it. You can only go to that height with that type of construction. If you want a taller building, you need to move up the scale in the level of fire resistance that you're providing. Next slide, please. So kind of coming to the end of like the slideshow part of it, but you know, for example, one recommendation, and going back to that last table, there's the possibility of let's tie the height limit to the most common likely type of construction in that zone. So for example, there's type 5A or B, which, as I talked to Sean earlier this morning, A is for more protective and B is for less protective. And that's not really well defined, as I understand. you
It's,
within that.
it's defined in table 601, but, yeah. Type A is more, combustion resistant, right? Type. Type 1 and 2, type A, you're required to have 4 hours. Of, a 4-hour firewall, type A, type 3. Or, I'm sorry, and then B in type 1 or 2 would be 3 hours.
Essentially, if you.
5 is generally what we see, right, wood frame construction, everything under the sun falls under 5. So A would be 2-hour fire resistance, B would be 1, so you see that like in a duplex. That party wall that's prescriptively required to be a 2-hour wall between those units. But then, even if you have a duplex, the code allows you to reduce that to a 1-hour firewall, but then they're putting in sprinkler systems, NFPA 13D system, but of course, the contractors, they don't want to put in a sprinkler system unless they have to, so we always see the 2-hour wall.
Thank you for introducing that. So as we're talking about what is an appropriate height limit, if we're going to see commercial type construction, mixed use construction, things like that, that's typically like type 2 construction. We would probably never see type 1 construction here in town, as I understand. That's more like the big buildings in Seattle, skyscrapers, metal, concrete, steel kind of stuff. So very likely the highest level of construction we could see here is type 2. And so with type A, you can get up to 65 feet, or type B, you get up to 55 feet. So, while that's a lot more than what we're currently seeing in our downtown, that does go to the concerns that at least Councilmember Bode brought up, which is, if we want to see more growth, we need to help make it pencil a little bit more, given all the regulations and everything with it. Can we do that by increasing height in a way that's, 65 feet or 55 feet, either of those, if we were to pick one of those for our downtown and commercial zoning, is that appropriate? It's more than what we have now, but is it completely out of scale with some buildings, the existing buildings that we have? No, there's a few buildings downtown that even exceed our current height limits because they were built before we had those limits. in
How
place.
tall is this building?
I don't know, I was on the roof the other day, it's pretty high up there.
Yeah.
So it
Probably not.
it is legal, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's.
Oh, yeah,
legal.
it's built.
Oh, I don't know, that's
Yeah.
probably 35 right here, and then you,
With the parapets, yeah,
Well, higher
probably
than
right
that.
around 40.
So- even if we eliminated the height limit, it still has to go through a hearing examiner.
Not necessarily,
No.
this would be allowed outright.
Oh,
This could be, yeah, they have to build per the code, right?
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of like, so you got, Jay, you kind of outlined, okay, so heights equate to certain fire protection, right? Okay, that makes sense, right? Vertical ladder, access, et cetera. Yeah, you probably to provide a little bit more protection, but limiting height. Nobody's building 111 West 57th Street by downtown Charlotte anytime soon.
And thank you, I went to bullet number 2 instead of bullet number 1 first, because we had been talking about it, but correct, do we even need a height? Is anybody?
That's what I'm saying, it's
Yeah.
like, no story, no height limit. I mean, obviously, they have to build a compatible building that's safe to occupy and aesthetic. I think a lot of the stuff is just aesthetics, right? Like, people don't want a tall building blocking their view. No.
And to jump onto the compatibility word that you just used, though, that's kind of the key, right? So if we don't have a height limit anywhere in town, and let's say on Olympic Highway, for example, somebody built something that's 90 feet, right? I mean, just picking a number. And they build it to, the appropriate level of construction materials and whatnot. How do we define the compatibility? I mean, it would just go through our site plan review process. It would be by right. And so, but going back to like the origin of zoning, it started because there were a lot of tall buildings going in around a lot of short buildings. People like access to natural light, get shaded out 9-10 hours a day, especially in places where you can get that many hours daily. So as a professional planner, I go back and forth on the height limit issue, because I mean, that's kind of where zoning really kind of started. And it's important to make sure that people are getting that light, ventilation, circulation. You don't want to be the only 1-story house left on the street surrounded by 6-story houses, or 6-story buildings, but at the same time, like, how do we define that compatibility? I mean, it would be a market departure from what we do now, where, you know, it encourages the development, and compatibility it can't be accounted for, right? Like, either we have a standard or we don't have a standard, kind of going back to the discussion. we just had. So, I mean, that being said, market forces, right, probably not even gonna see 90-story built, or sorry, 90-story, or 90-story buildings, in town, but
Probably won't see more than.
No,
Right.
or land, there's not a lot of places where like you're gonna go in there and build a 1 block 90-story building.
Wow.
It doesn't, I mean, it's gonna be a little,
Our goal is to add support one day, and there may be some property over there that can,
well, that's.
over
and see,
90-story
that's the thing.
building,
It'd
right?
be nice to take that up and not have to change it again.
so, yeah.
Different zone, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Zoning.
Commercial industrial zones obviously are different, have different uses, and different compatibility issues. You're not dealing with residences in those areas.
I get not going into a neighborhood, but a 9-story
Yeah.
house, like,
Yeah,
I'm gonna do
I mean,
9-story
I'll
houses.
I'll be honest with you, I mean, I'll be
You
really
don't want Bill
blunt.
Gates in your neighborhood?
Come on. Until we have that problem, I don't think you need the standard, right? And so right now, I mean, we don't have anybody coming in building massive commercial facilities in city limits. We don't have.
Is
I don't
anybody
see a
inquired?
concept of residential where we're gonna be exceeding 50, 60 feet. Now, like, this doesn't seem feasible.
I think that
feasible.
the issue that you will hear, we will hear is the compatibility within residential neighborhoods or the transition zones, right? Where you have a mixed use right next to residential zone, jumped in professional planner, I've just practiced for a couple of years, not very well. You have you have a Rambler and then right next door you have a transition zone, maybe CRV. And here comes, I don't know, type of construction, call it 50 foot, right? We'll hear about compatibility issues that happens.
But when we,
Specifically be able to demonstrate why that is being allowed.
But shouldn't
When we
you
were
be, shouldn't you be ready in case, and just get it ready? In case someone wants to do a, taller building instead of waiting?
Well, and that's the question is what is the likelihood of it occurring? Do market forces even make that feasible in Sheldon? Are we going to see anything like that? I mean, it would have to be a really interesting perfect storm for someone to say that pencils here. But that being said, it's not impossible. It's not utterly wrong.
we already had a developer wanting to build a 3-story apartment here already and pulled out of their 2-story because it didn't pencil out for them, and 3 stories may have. That's one thing, and
Mhm.
yeah.
And the issue with that was due to some loose interpretation of the word compatibility with the existing neighborhood. Whereas if we just said 3 stories in height is compatible, we have defined that there's no height limit. We do not have a problem with this. They may have got to 3 or 4 stories,
Yeah.
and that might have gotten us some housing. units.
Because when we were talking about the workforce housing project, we were talking about a lot of mixed use in there. We were talking about houses, we were talking about apartments and townhouses. And
With the majority of
And
lots that you can build.
you can
in
make-
downtown,
yeah,
to be limited and only do that 3-story, especially if you're in a CRV area where you have to do commercial, or downtown area, sorry,
Yeah.
you have to do commercial on the bottom.
Yeah.
So if you're not even putting housing on the bottom floor, so now you're.
How do we encourage it,
Yeah,
yeah.
right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's,
And it's how do we marry that financial feasibility for development and as a way to get density? 'Cause that's what we're talking about here, right?
what we need, 'cause
We are
we can't allow-
desperately under inventory for housing, not just in this community. But it's something that we need to look at. I'm sure there would be some concerns specifically, of course, residential, but specifically historic residential, what that might look like, so, but I mean, it seems.
Identify.
Cause that's not currently identified,
You currently identify, we can set some design standards too, that
right?
make them, if you wanna go higher, sure, but it has to look like your surrounding buildings, if that's the case, or we have.
10-story colonial house.
Story.
Yeah.
Hey, we'd love to go for it. One of the prettiest buildings we have in town.
I know.
The general commercial, industrial sites, downtown sites, if we want investment, if we want a hotel, right? Currently, our general commercial would have to go through a DA or a PUD of some sort to get a variance, get allowance to build higher than. What our current height standards are, and that certainly is something we don't necessarily want to go through. Right, love to allow a hotel in the proper zone to be built outright.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, and I think it sends the message that we realize that density is an issue. We are open for growth and development in a way that makes sense within our existing community, so.
But and would this make it easier for somebody like Paul's Equity to build their hotel?
So their hotel, their first iteration would have required some kind of variance from the height limit or some kind of alleviation. Actually came back with a second proposal that met it. And the way they redesigned it, they were gonna be able to get through this. Is the way we define our roof. So.
It just gives more flexibility.
Yeah, increasing the height limit will absolutely give us more options for people.
And on that though, you know, the market research dictated, you know, 90 to 120 rooms, so it's not like the market research said a 500 room hotel either, so. I
Right.
mean, so they're not building that, that's just my point,
A
it's like,
couple of,
I don't think in the next 15 to 25 years, you're gonna have somebody wanting to build 1,000-unit apartment downtown Shelton, and it'd be 15 stories or something, right, you know, like, yeah, we might have 4 or 5. Right? I mean,
Waterfront.
right, yeah.
And it's cheaper for municipal services, right, when you increase densities, that sprawl is much more expensive for all of the ratepayers in the
Yeah.
community.
Like,
100%.
Absolutely right, we can build up, we can increase density, it's cheaper for all of us, private services.
So I guess what I would look for is some consensus on, do we need a height limit? And if so, then, you know, do we kind of look at it more towards, you know, a minor increase, you know, from 35 to 40 or 50? Or do we just not need one at all because we decide that it's highly unlikely that we'll see anything that's that incompatible based on market forces and types of construction, cost of construction, cost of real estate. We may just not even see it. And then the second thing, so the height limit discussion is one, and then should we just remove the story qualification for the zone? I'm in favor of that. I can't see a good reason for having it.
Remove the what?
The story.
Okay,
So
okay.
like currently we limit the number of stories to 2. You can have a 35-foot house, but only 2 stories. And so
Yeah.
why can't you have a third story or a fourth story within that same height
Yeah.
volume? Or if we don't have a height limit at all, I mean, it just doesn't matter. So-
Yeah. Well,
Stories.
be great.
I don't think we need the story definition. My gut reaction is we probably don't need the height limit either, but I'd be interested to hear from, you know, our public if there's any concern over that.
Okay, Kathy.
We need the height limit. I mean, the height limit is good. I think it's good to do it up front instead of wait to see if somebody comes in and then change, you know, the rules on it. But, I think the height limit, I'm not sure about the stories, but the height limit, of course, I'm not gonna be here, so.
All right, Joe.
Not strikeable, that was easy.
Strike and both.
I'd like to unlimit it and market it. There's no reservations here. Let's go. Let's build 1,000-foot.
Okay, and we'll draft and bring that forward.
Again, assuming.
I guess the question, just the urgency, do we want to have this go as part of the comprehensive plan process? Because it changes the calculus for our buildable lands and housing inventory and things like that as we go. So, I mean, if you want to, we can do it now, or we can do it along the process, just.
I think it needs to be incorporated in the comprehensive plan at some level, but timing wise, I'm sure.
I'll probably just do it now. Comp plan's 2 years out.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
do it
18
now and then
months.
do what you gotta do in the comp.
That's what I'm saying, get it done now,
We'll bring it now.
going back.
And then tonight, drafting it tonight, that's the theme.
So
tonight.
hopefully, we
And
also
two
want
things on each night.
We'll bring coffee and for you later.
Did you know there's no height limits in Shelton? Well, let's go check out and see how high you can build there. I mean, it's.
Yeah.
All right,
Building code still.
Yeah, right.
Gotta be safe.
There's still some
Like
rails.
you took away that first layer of I can't build in Shelton.
What that likely means is we'll only see, you know, the 50 or 65, just based on typical types of construction. So that will be the de facto kind of, but it won't be prescribed that way. And so if somebody really does want to do type of construction, and some kind of skyscraper, be the only one in the area, but cool.
Well, for clarity,
That's not like
do sprinklers change that? I know it's based on occupancy, but type, I mean, can you go higher? In the height limit based on type of construction and sprinklers are at?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's, and there's tables.
And it's
but-
left
Sorry,
on
I'm putting on the spot there. Generally, that could apply.
Yeah. Very good.
You know, that could also solve issues with some of the buildings that are gonna cost too much to bring up to code to be able to use, because we got like, what, one down there with the staircase that's too narrow, you can't use the upstairs. You know, how do you widen it? Well, it's gonna cost $200,000, but cheaper to tear it down and build a two-story, new building.
That breaks my heart.
Are you talking about the antique store?
Is that the one that used to be the hair salon?
Yeah,
Yes.
in the,
I remember
There-
going in there
things
once,
are
and said
too
we can't go
narrow.
upstairs,
yeah.
not allowed to go up there.
Hmm.
So.
Thank you for this. Nice and clear. Good work. All right. So the last item that,
We,
sorry.
oh, normally we're on item for new discussion. We already know that we have an item for new discussion. We're gonna call it D1, and it's an appeal process, and city manager will probably brief us.
Yeah, I think. Dave's probably got a little more details, but as we've. Dove into the code a little more and looked at especially land use processes and latest hearing examiner decisions. We are finding that there are multiple areas within our code that have appeal processes, right? So they are within the enforcement section in 17, there are 238, 20.
Do you want to-
Sorry, yeah, go ahead, yeah.
So we define where our city hearings examiner, their duties and powers in the appeal process generally in 2.36 of the municipal code. And there's a whole section for appeal process within that. But then within each individual section of the code, like 1708 enforcement, for example, 1803, our building code administration. Nearly all of our Title 20.50, which is our zoning section that has to do with conditional use permits, things like that. It's inconsistent with where it directs the appeals. Some of the timeframes are different. Some of the responsible parties are different. One goes, the appeal of the hearings examiner decision goes to Superior Court. Most of them actually come to council, which I don't want that. Okay, thank you. Done. No, just for everybody.
Quasi judicial processes.
Exactly. Quasi judicial processes are difficult for councils to handle because they're it puts you in the very unenviable position of having to act as a judge, which means disclosure of conflicts, ex parte communications, so on and so on, the evidentiary rules. It's just better in general, and we're one of very few cities that still even has this. Most of them have made the transition for any appeal of the hearings examiner decision goes to the Superior Court. And so our recommendation, now we found this, and we have a couple of CUPs pending and a couple of large subdivisions that are coming through and everything. We'd like to get this cleaned up, have a consistency, have a redirection, have all of that done very quickly. And so we're hoping to add that to the agenda for your meeting on the 19th.
Yeah.
And we will have an ordinance prepared that basically consolidates all of those sections. So instead of it being spread out throughout the code and having different requirements in each of these sections, it will consolidate all of it. We'll just refer back to 2.36 and say, follow the appeals process for sure.
Much more consistent. I think it's, we found these issues, it's because there's been piecemeal amendments over time. And they haven't always referenced, right, every instance of an appeal process. So we create those instances. So we can set this up in one place within our code. All of those sections reference one appeal process. It'll be much easier when changes are in the future necessary as well.
Yeah, this isn't new. We've talked about this a couple of years ago. I'm surprised we haven't got it done yet. We're not qualified to make legal decisions. Sitting back here, and nor do we want to make legal decisions. So I'm all for moving that forward as soon as possible and getting us out of that role.
And again, clear, predictable, and concise, streamlined process. I think that's been the theme since 2018, right? So it's really nice to see the staff's being proactive and moving some of that forward. And I agree with you, Mayor Renisco, just move it forward, make it happen.
When the appeal happens and it goes to Superior Court, who bears the cost for it?
If they appeal, they have to file the fees and stuff. We have to provide our legal defense, which there's a cost to us, but depending on the words, we make it.
Fair enough. Yeah. I'm with it.
Just for clarification, it's the 19th, okay?
I'm fine with
That's
that.
in a week.
Yeah.
It's a fast track.
Would that get
If
us?
we can put building next, I'm all in.
All good? Yeah.
That's a little more finesse than maybe this one.
We're gonna touch real that, so.
No,
Yeah,
that's, it's important. I think that, I don't know, if it's that easy, I'm not sure why we haven't done it yet. So, I mean, we've been talking about it for a couple of years, for sure. Or it's come up.
There's some housekeeping.
It's come
Yeah,
up.
with, yeah, it's housekeeping, but you know, those housekeeping issues, you know, dust in certain areas where people aren't looking. I think that's kind of where we're at right now.
Next time I invite you.
Yeah, so now with some impending decisions coming up and some decision on subdivisions, yeah, let's make sure we have cleaned up those purposes.
All right, that sounds great.
Very good, guys. Good
All right,
meeting.
are there any other items for discussion? I know that we'll probably talk about this next meeting, but just want to talk about the volunteers at the North Cliff Park on Saturday. It was cold and wet, but very well attended. I think I counted 35 people at one point. Some dwindled when the snow started coming, but not many.
Smart.
Not, but it was a great turnout. It was hard work. I think I saw Mark put together and take apart a toy 3 times, at least, him and a couple of his friends, and, but,
He was training.
yeah, what, I tell you, some of the stuff was not easy,
You're the
but,
first ones to use it, right?
Yep.
You got to swing
You got-
around.
you got to
It's
swing around,
first
yep.
time, so there was a benefit.
but,
You earned that.
in the defense of all of us that worked all day on that, all the directions were gone by an hour after we got there. They were all wet and boom. So we were like, had to call the guy over that, the professional, and say, okay, we have no directions. What do we do? He said, oh, that screw goes there. Okay.
Reiterated a tremendous effort. We're happy to have so many
Yeah.
community
Yeah.
partners up there that day to create a new park.
Yeah.
Councilmember Schmidt mentioned last week, it's not open yet, though.
Yeah.
We have a little bit of work to do. We have some restoration work up there to do, but it's in, why it went in December is because we ordered it in June.
Yeah.
Right? So, we had some fundraising activities that took place, but it's in, not to worry about putting it in the spring, we can work on restoration, some other work going on up there at the park, and it'll be functioning, it'll be really cool and dedicated for that,
And I'd like to thank everybody who came and helped. It was extremely rewarding. And it was actually pretty fun. I mean, I lost my fingers for 2 or 3 hours when I got home, but they came
For
back.
those that don't have rain gear, like our mayor.
I had gloves, they just were soaked by.
Probably older than the others, or others that actually wore rain gear.
Hey, I gotta give credit to our Aaron. He wasn't dressed for it and he was a hard worker, man. He was in the dirt multiple times.
Sometimes by choice.
I wasn't gonna say that. Yeah, he fell a couple holes.
My God.
Awesome.
It was a great time and I really appreciate all of the volunteers that came down for that and did that for, it's our city coming together like we always do. So
That's our first new park since when?
At least about 30 years.
Long time.
Park
Essentially.
play area.
We have the
But
next
that's
one
people
identified?
equipment under.
You know
Huh?
what,
That's-
we don't really have the properties
That's right.
identified at this point that are vacant, but, we're probably looking at a big project in Inland Park to replace the play structure in the next few years. It's close to 30 years old, good structure, and yeah, I know. In fact, here's a short story, sorry to keep you longer, but, Keaton Collins, one of our parks employees, was up there helping us, and he helped put up the playground in Inland Park. That was his previous playground construction experience when he was 5.
Oh, my gosh.
That's awesome.
Glad to have him on board.
Exactly right.
Good stuff.
Those are great
Yeah,
stories.
yeah. Just so everybody knows that we had volunteers, I think 15 years old up to 80. So, yeah, so, I mean,
Awesome.
we had some teenagers up there that just saw it on a wall somewhere at school going to their counselor that volunteered and came down and helped. It was a great experience.
The city is full of people who want to volunteer, and I think we should have an outlet for that. I think we should increase our volunteer program in whatever way we have, and not just jumping in with the court people, pick up trash, so I think we should have a more vibrant volunteer program in the future, and I hope in the next year to do that.
And that volunteer program can help fix little things around people's
Yeah,
houses.
we can do code enforcement
New
volunteers.
steps or a new hand railing or a ramp. or-
We can find out.
Let's just be like,
Facilitate that or encourage that.
Yeah,
we pick up houses and move them like Amish people. I don't know,
Yeah.
but let's.
Barn raising.
Let's have that spirit, because I know it's here.
I was just gonna add that with the two large subdivisions that we still have proposed, there's neighborhood parks associated with both of those. That provide several acres of park space per subdivision.
Yes,
So,
Eagle Point Park standards.
Eagle
those will be
Point,
some
yeah.
impression. Actually, the Olympic Heights proposal is really neat, separated out, exercise equipment.
Eagle Point, Eagle Point.
Eagle Point's, yeah, on our list, yeah, trails are certainly a priority. Yeah, they're important, yeah.
All right. Anyone else have any new item of discussion? All right.
Great job. Thank you guys.
Study session is adjourned at 7:32 PM.